Jerome, and a very warm welcome to all our viewers. I just want to give, by way of a background, to say that this is more or less the anniversary of our first ever happy hour. And if you're new to the Housing Inn, just to say that we introduced the happy hour as a way of continuing our networking opportunities that prior to COVID were face-to-face, and where a number of organisations generously enabled us to meet on their premises, whether that was an extra care scheme or in their offices, to share findings, learnings, research, policy and practice. And for the last year, we've been running these happy hour sessions predominantly on a Thursday afternoon to continue that virtually. So really delighted that you can be with us, and also to have a distinguished cast this afternoon to talk about housing in relation to ageing and to look at that roadmap. Before I introduce David, I just wanted to add a couple of little points. For those of you who didn't attend the All-Party Parliamentary Group's AGM earlier this month, you may not be aware that the Minister, Chris Pincher, who attended and spoke at that, highlighted that it is the government's intention to commission a task force to think more strategically about housing for an ageing population, in particular in relation to specialist housing. And if you haven't already picked up on some of the major announcements today from government in the news, the proposals for planning reform were announced. And if you look in the small print, there's some encouraging news to think about what type of statutory responsibilities local authorities and their partners should have to think about specialist housing from a planning perspective. Now, today's and this afternoon session is much more broad, looking at housing in the main, both in mainstream and generalist housing, as well as specialist housing. And we've got four excellent speakers who are going to talk from their own organisational perspective around the types of roadmaps that they're involved in. And the title of this session comes from the blog that I wrote for ARCO to contribute to how to increase consumer and market confidence in this particular sector. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from David Orr, who some of you'll know is familiar to our happy hours, who's also a commissioner on the Church of England's recent commission on the housing crisis. But he's also chair of Clarion Housing Association, and we're delighted that he could be with us, along with Karen Mitchell, who's the chief executive of Southway Housing Trust, but also a leading light in the work happening across Greater Manchester with the Ageing Well programme and chairing the projects with the Greater Manchester housing providers. And Vic, welcome as well. We've had a long history linking in with South Yorkshire Housing Association, especially the Live Well journey. So really looking forward to how that's progressed and the work that you're doing across the region around health and wellbeing. And last, by no means least, a warm welcome to Dan as well. We've got a long relationship with Methodist Homes, and I know that your organisation has been under the spotlight for other reasons because of the substantial presence you have in the care home industry and the lessons you have from that in terms of challenging as well as informing and influencing change in the sector, but also what your retirement housing offer looks like as well. So a really great opportunity to hear from each of you, but also then an opportunity for people who are watching or listening to post questions, and we'll pull those together hopefully just before 5 o'clock and bring the session to a close around 5:15 or thereabouts. We have been known to run over, but we try not to do so. Without further ado, David, thanks very much for joining us again.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, and it is once again a real pleasure to be here. I just need to say at the start that on this occasion, I have had to take the happy hour literally, and will be leaving at 5 o'clock. I have another engagement that I have to attend. I have no idea what's going on outside my house, so if you're hearing great loud music, it's coming from somewhere near me. Yeah, so I'll be leaving at 5 o'clock, but Sarah Mitten from Clarion will be helping to answer any questions, actually probably in a far more detailed way than I would be able to. I want just to show you one slide. If we can move to the first slide, please. So this is the Clarion context. People know that Clarion is now the biggest housing association in the country. I'm not sure that many people knew that Clarion is the 5th largest provider of housing for older people of all organisations in the country. And just to expand a little on the context, the starting point for Clarion's work and some of the things that I've been interested in. I'm also currently chairing a thing called the Good Home Inquiry, which was established by the Centre for Ageing Better. And the Good Home Inquiry is looking at our current housing, the quality of our existing housing stock. Almost all investigations into housing end up focusing on new build, which is necessary, essential, fine, but we have 23.5 million homes already in England, and many of them are not good. We have the oldest and poorest quality housing taken collectively in Western Europe. We have 4.3 million homes that fail the basic minimum, which is the Decent Homes standard. And of the 4.3 million homes, half of them are occupied by people over 55. And it is a fact that the older you are, the more likely you are to live in a home classified as non-decent. And the people who need good quality most, people over 75, that's the group that is most proportionately likely to be living in a substandard home. That means a home that's difficult to heat or has trip hazards or all the kinds of things that mean that people can't have an active, healthy later life and are more likely to end up in them being hospitalized. So that's the first point. The second point is that much of the work that we do focuses on the contribution that social housing providers make. But the biggest, by far, the biggest number of homes that are classed as non-decent are in the owner-occupied sector. And I think that there is a real and continuing challenge to find mechanisms where institutions, and I think that includes the people who are involved in this conversation, understand that there are many, many, many older people living in our communities who are disconnected, who are socially isolated, who are living in poor quality homes, but who will not be moving into residential care or other homes that are specially designed for older people. And if that is true in the owner-occupied sector, it is also true to some extent in the social housing sector, and it is increasingly true and worryingly true in the private rented sector. So in the social sector, and particularly obviously in Clarion, we have 40,000 households where the lead tenant is aged above 55. The profile of housing association tenancies tends to be that household leads are either at the younger end of the age group or the older end of the age group, rather than that bit in the middle. And it is also the case that 95% of us, however old we become, will never live anywhere other than in our homes in the community. There is an absolutely critical role to play for extra care and care homes and sheltered housing and all these other things that are specifically designed for older people. But other people will talk about that today, not me. I'm going to talk about the 95% of us who will never move into specialist accommodation, but will live in the community. So for Clarion, residents aged 55 plus, half of them say they have a disability, half have a long-standing health problem, a third say they only have enough money for essentials, 57% live alone, and 48% never use the internet. Now let's just take a step back and think about that. I don't know about you, but before COVID, I used the internet a lot. Since COVID, both professionally and personally, it has felt like we've lived in the internet. People who don't use the internet are excluded from a vast array of things that are just an essential, integral part of the modern world, of the world that we live in. And we need to do something that changes the way that we think about how we provide services and resources for older people. we've got a long history. Actually, one of the specific components of the work of the Good Home Inquiry is looking at digital connectivity, a piece of work that we're just about to focus on now. But I can tell you, before we've completed that piece of work, that the inquiry is almost certain to recommend that we should move rapidly to an environment where it would be as unthinkable to move into a home without broadband connectivity as it would be to move into a home without electrical connectivity. It is now that important to the way that we engage with the world. So if we are going to think coherently about how we meet the housing needs of older people, we actually have to think about how we meet the housing needs of the community. You cannot look at housing for older people really without looking at the whole raft of our housing stock, because I have no idea who will be living in the house that I am living in now in 20 years' time. It might be me as a very crotchety old person. It might be someone who will be 23, who knows? But we cannot just assume that the house that we're in at the moment should be designed for older people. What we need to do is think of how we design individual homes and how we create places that are suitable for all of us at the different stages in our lives. One of the things that most frustrates me about the approach that the volume developers take is when they say, well, we don't need to build homes that are built to accessible standards because we've done a customer survey and none of our customers need those accessibility standards. And I think that may be true today, but if you only ever think about the house that you're building in terms of the first customer use, then you're going to build homes that have problems built into them for future occupiers, or even those same occupiers in 30 years' time. And of course, the great thing about building to accessible standards is that there's no downside to it. If you build a home that doesn't have a step up to it, it is not just easier for a wheelchair or someone using a walking frame to get through, it's easier to get a double buggy through, or to get a trolley that's got the wardrobe that you're moving into your house with. I mean, there are no downsides to doing that other than this kind of long-standing thing that says it might cost a few £100s more. Now, this is why I am personally so committed to the work that Clarion is doing in its new attempt to think differently about how we engage with our aging population. We have an age-friendly strategy, not an old people-friendly strategy, but an age-friendly strategy, because we want our communities and our homes to be friendly to people who are 2 years old, as well as people who are 92 years old. We need to ensure that people live in connected communities, where people have the ability to retain agency, retain their own autonomy, their own health, their own dignity, their own sense of having a place in that community and a place in the world, not being isolated from it and separated from all of the rest of us. We need to have a clear sense that if you are building a community that fits those principles, you will be building a community that isn't just good for older people, it is good for everyone. And when you build a community that's good for everyone, you build a place that helps to add to people's individual confidence, their ability to engage with the world, the ability to make the best uses of their own personal resources in how they engage with the world. We want people to be able to age well in our communities. That's the Clarion mission. It's very similar to the Centre for Aging Better, where the mission is that older people should be able to live healthy and fulfilling lives. Why would we not want to do that? So it is absolutely clear that we have to design and build schemes that enable our residents to live longer, healthier, happier lives, and ensure that people have access to the right home at the right time, and where people have the agency to shape their lives and communities no matter what their age. One of the things, I'm going to finish on this point, but one of the things that I think we often fail to understand is that older people don't just have a past, we have a future. And there are plenty of people in their 90s who have ambition, not just memories. And we need to ensure that we incorporate that into our thinking. Thank you.
David, thanks ever so much for a real passionate opening, and you're absolutely right. You know, older people is not just about the Tom Moores of this world, it's about all of us as we age, and as important as he was, we need to think about how we maintain this as much more universal. And I think at your heart was very much about age friendliness and adapting to a changing societal space. Without further ado, I know, Karen, this is something also that is very much at your heart as well, both at Southway, but also the work that you're doing across Greater Manchester. And thanks very much for taking the opportunity to share some of your work there. So over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, I'm Karen Mitchell. I'm the Chief Exec at Southway Housing Trust. We're a Manchester-based, community-based organisation, so a little bit different to Clarion. But I'm also the Greater Manchester Housing Provider lead on the sort of ageing well work that's going on across Greater Manchester. So 26 housing providers involved in GMHP and working closely on some of these issues. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Greater Manchester approach and how that's all coordinated through the Ageing Hub. Couple of slides on Southway just to tell you what we've been up to, and then I'm going to focus for the rest of the time on a delivery plan that we've been recently working on through the Housing Planning and Ageing Group. So the next slide just summarises for you how the sort of ageing well agenda is approached in Greater Manchester, and it really is an innovative approach that's very much strongly based on partnership, and any organisation, agency, partner that you could think of that might be able to contribute to this agenda is genuinely involved, coordinated through the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the Ageing Hub. Simple ambition is that Greater Manchester should be a great place to grow old. The Ageing Hub, set up in 2016, is there to sort of challenge the strategic response to looking at all the opportunities and challenges of an ageing population, and it is one of the top 10 mayoral priorities, so it's an Andy Burnham priority across Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester is also very proud to have been the first age-friendly city region, and that was designated by the World Health Organization back in 2018, and there's a strong strategic partnership in place with the Centre for Ageing Better, so we've been working jointly with them since 2016 on a whole range of research projects to inform how we approach things, and this is all underpinned in a Greater Manchester context with an objective of reducing inequalities, which sort of crosses all our objectives. In the next slide, I'll just very quickly tell you a little bit about Southway. As I said, we're very different to Clarion in that we're a 6,000 home organisation. We're community based and very community focused. We work in the south of the city of Manchester, and that is the only area that we work in. So we see our role being very much in that sort of community base, working in neighbourhoods. We've had an age-friendly strategy for nearly 10 years now. When we first looked at the World Health Organization age-friendly framework and felt that it really sort of rang true in what we were trying to do. And just like David said, very similar experience in that we know that most people are going to stay where they are. Most people want to stay where they are. We need to make sure that neighbourhoods are age friendly, and that anything we do, even if it's new supply, is very much within existing communities and existing neighbourhoods. And so that's very much been our approach. We designed a new methodology around assessing how age friendly neighbourhoods actually are, going back to 2012 now, and that's been replicated in over 50 neighbourhoods across Greater Manchester. So that does really define our approach. It's about people and where they live and what adds to people's day-to-day quality of life experience. There's a few bullet points there just on our current age-friendly strategy, which is the sort of current version of it, but you'll see that it is very much a rounded approach that's about health and well-being, connections, social connections, access to service, not just housing. The next slide, we are obviously wanting to increase the supply of homes. We know that there's not enough choice for people in mid to later life. We know we need to do more around this, and these are just a couple of examples of Southway projects. The one on the left is our most recent project, which is a mixture of affordable rent and older person shared ownership, which has really gone like hotcakes. There's a real market for that, certainly in Manchester. And the one on the right hand side is our first project going back 8 years now, which was particularly targeted at people in their 40s and 50s who were wanting to downsize once, as we called it then, once their families had sort of moved on. So it was encouraging people to think at a slightly earlier time in their lifespan about moving on to more appropriate accommodation. But what both these schemes have in common is that they're slap bang in the middle of existing communities. They were very much designed with the local community in mind, and the vast majority of people who moved into these schemes came from the immediate neighbourhood, releasing family homes. So that's one of the things we've been able to achieve in recent years. Moving on to the next slide, I'll just go back to Greater Manchester now and the work we've been doing there. So as part of the Ageing Hub and the Greater Manchester strategy, there is a work stream that's specifically about housing. And the aim of that work stream is very simply to increase the supply of age-friendly homes for those in mid to later life. This is all sectors. We're not just looking at social housing, it's all types of housing. And this work is led through the Housing Planning and Ageing Group, which I currently chair, but has cross-sector representation on it. Some really good people on there, including Jeremy. So a really good sort of range of people who bring their ideas and expertise. Over the last few years, we've very much focused on understanding the evidence base. We're very fortunate to have a very strong university sector around Manchester and Salford, and they're all engaged in this work, as are the Centre for Ageing Better, as I mentioned earlier, through the strategic partnership that we have in place. But we also have a Greater Manchester Old People's Network, which means that people in mid to later life are directly able to influence the work that we're doing. And some of the publications, some of the research that's been done is shown there on the right hand side. For me, probably the most significant one there has been the Right Sizing report, where there's been very detailed work done at a neighbourhood level to understand what are the barriers to people choosing to move, what are the things that would help people to choose to move. And there's been some quite interesting findings coming out of that report. It is available if people want to have a read of it. What we're doing now is we're sort of refocusing our efforts because we want to make sure that we can demonstrate we are delivering things on the ground. We've done a lot of research now and we're sort of changing focus to this delivery plan. And we've been working with a consultancy called ARC4, who were commissioned by the Centre for Ageing Better on our behalf to have a look at our delivery plan, at least for the next sort of 3 to 5 years. So on the next slide, this just tells you a little bit about the purpose of our delivery plan. It's about setting an agreed vision. You know, what do we really mean when we talk about age-friendly housing, when we talk about increasing supply for people in mid to later life? We recognise, and you can see our vision statement there on the right-hand side, that this is a very diverse group of people with different interests, backgrounds, financial abilities, all sorts of different people. And we need more choice. There's just not enough choice out there for people to look at what a future option might be for them. So in increasing supply, we need to increase choice. We need to recognise the diverse nature of the group that we're talking about, but it does also need to be about neighbourhoods, quality of life, promoting social connection, and all those sorts of things that add to people's health and well-being and ability to remain independent. So our vision is quite a rounded vision. It's cross-sector. We will continue to look at the evidence base. That is going to be an important part of what we do. We think that strengthens the arguments that we want to make, and we're going to continue to make sure that the voice and experience of residents is within there, along with practitioner knowledge. If I move then on to the next slide. So what's come out of our delivery plan, and this is quite a big piece of work, so I'm summarising it in 5 bullet points really, but we've identified 5 main themes or areas that we want to focus on to really push this agenda forward across Greater Manchester. The first one is that we really need to secure a space in the strategy and policy landscape. So all the relevant documents, the planning framework, the housing strategy, they all talk about age-friendly housing. There's always a reference in there to this particular age group, but it doesn't quite translate through to being a bit more firmed up and a bit more definite and a bit more sort of directly influencing stuff day to day. So that's a key thing that we need to do, is to make sure that those high level strategy and policy documents have got the right commitments in and the right targets. We also want to make sure we reset the conversation from vulnerable to valuable. Again, similar to one of David's comments, not everyone's going to want to live in sheltered housing or extra care. Not everybody needs care and support. This is a diverse range of people. We need choice. We need to recognise that people in mid to later life will and do continue to contribute a lot to our communities and our neighbourhoods. So that whole thing about how we market this, how we talk to people, how we change perceptions is a big part of the delivery plan. We do, of course, need to make an impact on the ground. Some of the research is really relevant here, because the right sizing report, for example, changes your ideas around what does need to be delivered on the ground. What are the different models that we're going to look at? Are we going to have co-housing? Are we going to have extra care? Are we going to have, all these different models, intergenerational developments? And that sort of research and informing that needs to be widely shared to encourage and inform private developers, social housing providers, all the different sort of markets across GM. We want to have a work stream that's about promoting this idea of improve or move. A lot of people in mid to later life might not have moved house for many years. It might feel a bit onerous. It might be something people are not that familiar with. So we want a service there that people know how to access support, advice, whatever they need. It might be financial packages to help people find a new home before they've sold the old one. That gives people a bit more reassurance about taking that big step. Or it might be helping people who want to stay where they are and giving advice on how you can improve your existing housing situation. So that's something, as a partnership across GM, we want to coordinate all this and pull it together into a service offer. And finally, part of what we can do is promote and influence and celebrate all the homes and places that are already there. There's a sort of really good practice already across GM. It's just we haven't got it at enough scale. So we're looking at how we can do more around that, promoting good practice, perhaps having an award scheme, lots of different areas in there. So if you are interested in that, I can send you a copy of the report, and there's lots of ideas in there that we're just starting to work through and put action plans in place. The next slide picks up a sort of general one that crosses all those themes, which is we want to put in place a cross-cutting age-friendly housing charter. And this is because we recognise that there's loads of different bits of information, all, locally, nationally. It's sometimes quite difficult to cut through it all and just work out what's the most important stuff to be reading. So the age-friendly housing charter, we'll bring this together into one place. It'll be practical, but being very clear about the principles, the standards, and the showcasing of what we mean and what we want. So that's something that's going to be developed through the partnership group. And finally, I think this is the final slide. The delivery plan so far has been really well received. I think everyone's been quite excited by it because it's starting to look in a more strategic way at how we influence, enable, push this agenda forward. So all the partners and the stakeholders have received it really well. We've now got to make it more focused. We've got to turn it into an action plan. We've got to be clear on who's going to lead on the different bits. Make sure that our ambition is properly built into all the relevant strategies and documents across GM, and we are now starting to have these conversations with the sort of next round of partners who we need to be involved to help us deliver this, including, of course, the private sector. And the delivery plan will be formally launched in September. And on the last slide, you've just got all the contact details for myself and for the GM Ageing Hub. I should have mentioned at the beginning, the Greater Manchester sort of logo is that we do ageing differently. There's a real focus on innovation, on sort of pushing this agenda, looking at it as in a very sort of rounded way around quality of life. So yeah, in Greater Manchester, we're doing ageing differently. So thank you.
Karen, thanks very much for a fabulous presentation, and I'm sure colleagues on the work stream in Manchester will be familiar with some other people like Paul McGarry, who's spoken at other events as well. But what I really liked, I think, is what you were talking about, moving the language and the narrative from vulnerable to valuable. I thought that was a really powerful point, and it reminds me very much, you know, the improve or move sort of talk that you've been highlighting. It reminds me also of some of the old mantras, should I stay or should I go? And how do we enable people to take more choice and control over those decisions as well? And you really articulated that brilliantly. So thanks ever so much. And you also touched on sort of health and well-being issues. And I know this probably is a good link over to Vic, who's our next speaker, because Vic, the work that you've been doing very much across the Pennines in South Yorkshire is very much based on a health well-being model and working across a number of health and social care economies. So really pleased that you can follow. So over to you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Jeremy. I'll just bring up my slides.
While you're doing so, can I remind people that if David and Karen have sort of stimulated a question, please do post them. I don't think we've got any yet, so please do put questions or comments in. Over to you, Vic. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's all right.
Vic,
here we go. I've got it.
Perfect. Yeah.
It just hid from me for a second there, just to stress me out. Just bring that up. Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you for inviting me to speak today about some of the stuff we're doing at South Yorkshire Housing Association. So I'm Vic Sterling, I'm the Head of Service for South Yorkshire Housing. So I just wanted to, I was just going to start off with a bit about South Yorkshire Housing, just a really small bit, and then talk about 3 of the services that we're currently running, which have a real focus on people in mid to late life, and then I just wanted to end really with some challenges or some things that are really at the top of our kind of thinking at the moment, that we're working through at the moment, because I suppose what I didn't want to do was just present this kind of glossy, this is what we're doing, without really bringing out some of the things that are challenging us and that we want to do better and to think about more as well. So just in terms of South Yorkshire Housing Association, a bit like what Karen was saying, we're a relatively small housing association. We're based just in the Sheffield city region. We have also about 6,000 homes, and our purpose is for customers to settle at home, live well and realise their potential. And that purpose isn't something that just sits on in a booklet somewhere. It really drives what we do as an association across all of the services that we deliver. So we really think about those 3 points really clearly when we're thinking about developing or tendering for services. I suppose we're unusual to some other housing associations just in the level of care and support that we offer, that makes up our business. So over 50% of our business are care and support services rather than general needs provision, and that ranges across a whole range of services: mental health, old people services, homeless services, and a range of just different support that we offer. And again, I think that that's something that we really think about in terms of our offer and our looking through the lens of an ageing population. We know that people in mid to later life sit across all of those services and have very different needs across all of those services as well. So it's just something that we have to consider and think about when developing services. So I just wanted to talk about 3 services that are maybe specifically around people in mid to later life, and are quite different, but I think complement each other in different ways. So the first is the Age Better in Sheffield programme. So Aging Better is a national lottery community funded programme. It's one of their strategic programmes, and it was set up in 2014. So it was a 6-year programme, and 14 areas across England were successful in securing investment. South Yorkshire Housing has led it for Sheffield for the last 6 years, and we're the only housing association to do so. So I think that gives us a really unique insight into a housing association delivering a programme like this. This is very much aimed at people across Sheffield. So this isn't people in our homes, in South Yorkshire Housing homes. And a bit like David was saying earlier, this is about people in a whole range of tenures across the city, with a real focus on reducing isolation and loneliness amongst that customer group across the city. We've been really lucky with it. It's very much a test and learn programme from the lottery. So there's been a lot of flexibility for innovation and for trying things out differently, which we've been really lucky to be able to do. And we've seen some really good impact from that. So there is a national evaluation for the Aging Better programme across the 14 areas, but we also are lucky to have local evaluators at Sheffield Hallam University as well, and we've been able to build up a really good knowledge bank and data bank of the work that we've been able to do, and we've got absolutely tons of learning that we'd love to share with people. In 2020, last year, we were lucky to secure an additional 1-year investment in Age Better in Sheffield, making it a 7-year programme, which rarely happens. So the real focus this year is about sharing that learning. So we'd really like to do that. One thing that we really want to do across our services, because we work across a range of different funders, so we have local authority funders, we have trusts and foundations, we have health funders, and it can be easy to just offer quite siloed services across the different projects that we run, and we really try to open up the breadth of our offer to customers as much as possible. So one example of this is over the course of last year, we were able to bring our Age Better in Sheffield programme into extra care schemes. So we had a Moments of Joy programme, which was about bringing arts and music into extra care schemes during the pandemic. So really thinking about this, 6 years of focusing on isolation and loneliness, and then thinking about the impact of the pandemic, the restrictions and people having to shield, and how we can bring those 2 programmes together to deliver something that has real impact. And that's been a really successful programme and will continue until 2022. The second service that I wanted to talk about was Live Well at Home. Again, touching back really on what David was saying in his really good introduction, we know that most people will choose to stay living at home, and once we identified that, we went out to secure investment in offering a service to help people to stay at home, to live well at home, hence the title. So this is a service that's funded by Sheffield City Council. It's absolutely about supporting people to stay at home across, again, a range of tenures, often homeowners, but a whole range. So it might be people in our homes, and it might not be as well. And it's a really diverse range of support that the service offers. So it might be about the poor quality of housing and making improvements to the housing, to the home that someone's in, or it might be around financial support to continue to stay at home, or aids and adaptations, or whatever that is. So it's really open about what that person gets support to help them to stay at home. And the other thing that's really great about this service is that it's a completely open referral route in. So it doesn't have to go through adult social care through the local authority. So a family member might refer a third-party agency, or a person themselves might refer into the programme. The third one is My Best Life Barnsley. So this is a social prescribing service that we run in Barnsley, with a real focus on reducing and supporting people to improve their health and well-being and reduce use of secondary care. And again, this support takes place in people's homes. So this isn't about supporting people in South Yorkshire housing homes necessarily, but sometimes is the case. And there's a real focus here around partnership. So this is very much a partnership approach to deliver this service. And again, like what I was saying before about trying to connect services together to really open up the support that people can receive. We have the Good Work programme, which is a work and health programme. So it provides specialist support for people who are either struggling to stay in work because of a health condition, or are out of work because of a health condition. And we've brought that programme into the social prescribing service as well. So that connecting of services to give people the best support that they can receive. And we're seeing that it's, the early data from this service that we've been provided by partners is showing that it's starting to have a real impact. So this is something that we want to build on in terms of future services that we offer. So there are three of the services, but all of them we're looking at through they are specifically designed for people in mid to later life. And like I said before, across all of our services, we know that people are approaching later life, or aging. We're all aging every day. So there's something for us about taking what we're learning from these services and trying to improve the services that we offer across the piece. So in terms of challenges ahead, so this is the stuff that we're really mulling over at the moment, that we want to do more of, to do better of. So there's definitely future-proofing our homes, and I don't think I can say it better than David did earlier. I think that idea of having a real a cross-life course approach to how we view our homes and how people age in our homes across a long period of time is really important to us. I think at the moment our reflection is that we're quite reactive with that, and we'd like to be more proactive. So that's something that we've got in our sights to come. The other is just opening up our services across all of our customers. So again, we've got such a great range of services, but actually because of the size of those services, or sometimes the geographical restrictions on those services, we're not getting the greatest benefit from them to the greatest benefit of people. So we know, we've got 6,000 homes across the Sheffield City region, and we know that a really significant number of people aged over 50 are living in those homes, and we want to really open up that offer. We want to deliver a greater range of housing options for customers, especially for customers in mid to later life. So that's a real focus for us at the moment. Again, I think we try when opportunities come up to really respond to this, but again, I think we can be more proactive, and that's something that we're having conversations about at the moment. And then there's just something around kind of short-term versus long-term thinking, really. And to give an example of this, we deliver a number of homeless services across the Sheffield City region, and we absolutely know that there are many people in those services in their 40s and 50s who, due to kind of have physical health conditions that are really starting to prevent them from staying in the home that they might be in. But we also have short-term funding opportunities like the Rough Sleep Accommodation Programme. That's all about just doing things here and now. So what we want to do is build more accessible homes. What we want to do is, retrospectively make adaptations to the homes that we have to meet the needs of this customer group, but there is always this very kind of short-term pressure to just deliver on some of these homes. So that's something that we're really thinking about as well. And then the final one is making our services more inclusive. Over the course of the last year, we've done quite a bit of work developing a race action plan, for example, and we know that some of our services really do what they need to do in terms of being very inclusive, and some of them don't, and that's something that absolutely we're going to look at and make changes on over the next couple of years. And that's it. I've just said if you want to get in touch, please do. I'd love to hear from you.
Vic, thanks ever so. That again, a fantastic presentation which followed on really neatly from the first two, and also sort of put the spotlight on both your work, but also how that links strategically again to sort of delivering different objectives locally, and that sort of link with health and well-being sort of being critical. And I love this sort of the point about the moments of joy as well. And obviously next week is Loneliness Awareness Week, and it's interesting to see how things like creativity, arts, and others have enabled people to connect, and actually links back to what David was saying around digital connection as well, and various different ways. So thanks very much. I know there are a couple of questions coming in into the chat box, more importantly into the Q&A. Our final presenter this afternoon is Dan Ryan from Methodist Homes. And Dan, I think you're the odd one out here. In fact, that Methodist Homes are a specialist provider of both residential and retirement housing, whereas I think David, Karen and Vic all come from more of a general needs background or family housing mix as well. But you're going to talk about your reflections and also the impact that COVID's had. So over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me to offer my reflections today. And yeah, I think probably worth stating before I kick off. You're right. I think we are the odd ones out in terms of where we're coming from in that provision, and I'm very aware that I'm probably the odd one out in as much as I'm certainly the junior partner on the panel when it comes to experience in housing services here today. My background is very much in the provision of residential health and social care services, and mostly in services for people with mental health issues or people living with a learning difference rather than people living in later life. I kind of came into this part of the sector about 5 years ago, and then my move to MHA in the second half of 2019 really represented my first direct experience of delivering housing services for people in later life. So in terms of then learning lessons from the pandemic and reflections around that, probably also worth saying then my role spans the full range of services that we deliver at MHA. So that's everything from community support through digital services, through our retirement living services, both with care and without care, and including residential care, dementia care, through to kind of complex nursing services. So retirement living for us is very much part of a very broad continuum of services. And I suppose naturally, any reflections or lessons that I might draw will be done so through the lens of that experience that I have as a provider of residential care. So when COVID arrived at the start of 2020, I was very much still on a steep learning curve when it comes to housing provision and MHA. So I think my experience of retirement living has very much been about keeping people safe and crisis management, rather than some of the much more kind of strategic work that's been referred to earlier on. But I'll offer some reflections in that light, and maybe look forward a little bit in terms of our offer. I think in terms then thinking about retirement living and our services, certainly our kind of extra care and housing with care services from MHA, from my perspective, there's long been an expectation in the social care sector, probably conversations going on for at least the last decade, that housing with care or extra care services would in time develop to replace the less complex end of the residential care sector. And certainly from looking at it from the other side of the coin, the threshold for publicly funded entry into residential care has absolutely increased. But what I haven't seen, and I'm happy to stand corrected, is that the market has really stepped in terms of extra care and retirement living sector to pick up that slack. So what we haven't seen is that move out of residential care and into extra care or housing with care in any meaningful sense. And I have a view that there's kind of a complex set of reasons around that. I certainly see from my perspective that there are some clear kind of supply side issues, and we do see the market does seem able to respond at the social housing end of the spectrum, and also at the kind of wealthier aspirational lifestyle end of the market. But there seems to me to be a real paucity of offerings that really attract people for that area where the majority of us live, which is not at one or the other end of the spectrum. So I think there's, in terms of really recognising what I think everybody said before, in terms of a very small section of the population will make the decision to move into a retirement living setting in later life. I do think we need to have a much more open conversation in society about our options and our desires and how we see that working through. I think there's a complex range of cultural issues as to why people might not make that choice. But whilst we've got, and forgive the background behind, but whilst we've got a social care system that's underfunded, and whilst people are not well informed about what their options are and where that might end, I think that's always going to be the case. So I may be straying off topic there, but do visit our Fixed Care for All campaign and have a look at that as well. But in terms of our retirement living schemes, one of the things that became apparent quite quickly during the first wave of the pandemic was that residents living in our retirement living schemes were far less likely than their counterparts of a similar age in our care homes to contract COVID-19. And whilst there are many factors behind that, I think it's also fair to say that we discovered that they were also less likely than the general population of people living in later life, people in the community, to contract COVID-19. And I think it's fair to say that the fact that they had access to wellbeing care, housing management staff, who in turn had access to good quality and sufficient PPE, and who could enable and assist those people to shield effectively, to help them with shopping, to help them with activities of daily living, ensure they were fully informed about the rapidly changing government guidance and translate that into something meaningful, really helped to make sure that the number of outbreaks in our retirement living scheme remained very low when compared with the general population, and incredibly low when compared with living in residential care. So I think in short, it's fair to say that extra care, and certainly our extra care schemes, were a safe place to be for people. But it's also worth saying that that safety comes at some considerable cost. So many of the people who move into our schemes do so to be part of a community. And as they went through that situation with the lockdowns and the pandemic, they found themselves without access to the very community facilities that they'd moved into those schemes to take advantage of. So no access to the communal spaces, so living then in fairly small units, no access to the bistros and restaurants that would be available in an extra care facility. The communal activities, and was really encouraging to see the kind of moments of joy, but those activities taking place outside where it was safe to do so, and where we were allowed to facilitate that, rather than the groups and the kind of community activities that would normally be taking place within a scheme that's established there for a kind of later life community. I suppose the theme that's kind of run through a lot of these talks this afternoon then is the potential for loneliness and social isolation. And I think that as we went through the pandemic, what we saw is we weren't really geared up to make sure that although we knew where people were and they were in a safe environment, we hadn't thought in advance about how we tackle that loneliness and that social isolation. So colleagues adapted very quickly and really stepped up to provide that kind of support and step in and meet people's emotional and well-being needs, particularly when lockdowns were on and particularly when it was difficult for families to visit. But ultimately, we need going forwards to think about much more broadly how we respond to the things that are really important to people as to why they move into these type of communities. So we've heard a lot from our residents over that 18 months about what is important to them, and community engagement, day-to-day interactions, coming together with neighbours. Many of the basic things that you would think you would have access to within those communities were lost during the course of that pandemic. And moving forward, ourselves and other providers, I think, really need to have clear plans as to how they will facilitate the building of strong communities, and how they're going to access and provide befriending services and facilitate that both physically and digitally, and make sure that residents have access to digital communities and activities and are able to maintain contact throughout. Thinking more broadly for MHA and our retirement living schemes, we've grown over the period of about 80 years into a fairly large provider of care and housing and support. But we've done that largely through opportunities and through legacy rather than through a really clear kind of design and strategic intent. And one of the consequences of that is our retirement living offer is very much a kind of broad range of individual schemes, ranging from housing association, rental and leasehold schemes, and mixes of all of the above. Some of our schemes offer care, some of them don't, and some of them offer care to everybody, and some offer care to some. So it's a real eclectic mix of schemes. And whilst the last 18 months have been incredibly difficult for our residents and our colleagues, those 18 months have also provided a real space, I think, for reflection. And as a charity, we've really gone back to review our core charitable mission when it comes to our retirement living services. And we're really clear that what we should be about as a charity is providing housing and care. And I think it's really important that the care element is associated with that to those in need. And put on a personal level, I've got a really strong desire to see us focus on our schemes for those people that where I perceive the commercial market doesn't cater well for them. And we want to build schemes that are absolutely rooted in and want to be part of their local community, and in ways where that's really sustainable, both in kind of business as usual life and when crisis strikes, as it has done over the past 18 months. Consequently, on the back of that, we're in the process of remodeling our retirement living kind of management structure to ensure we're much more fit to deliver that in the future. We're building the flexibility that we've had to show in the last 18 months into the kind of core of the way that we do things. I'm aware of the time, so I'll try and kind of rush through, but part of the way that we're doing that is involving moving away from single site generalist managers to a much kind of clearer multi-site specialisms. We're making sure that our care and wellbeing offer is much more integrated and flexible going forwards. Our care management teams have got a much clearer brief to reach out and provide care into the local community, in addition to within the boundaries of our own schemes. And where we have schemes that are co-located with our community-based schemes, we're looking much more to build bridges between those schemes and out into the community, and to bring the community into our retirement living settings. And then finally, we're developing quite a wide range of digital services, and that includes expanding our digital befriending scheme, as well as providing on-demand activities around exercise and green care. We have a digital chaplain, and we're really working hard to kind of build the infrastructure for digital engagement, to build people's ability to form online communities and tackle that social isolation come what may. If I can just say just at the end, I think it's also worth saying that the pandemic has kind of been a bit of a forge in terms of change right the way across the piece. And we have seen in the lifting of both of the lockdowns a fairly significant surge in demand for our retirement living services. And I think that what it's made a lot of people do is really think about the options that are available to them. And we're certainly starting to see people make inquiries for retirement living where they are making decisions that include planning for a potential future where they may need support or they may need some element of care, and making those decisions much earlier rather than waiting until the decision is very much made and they then move into a residential care setting. So maybe that that kind of long-awaited shift that I mentioned at the beginning after many years is finally happening.
Dan, thanks ever so much. That was really interesting, and also thanks for sharing your thoughts about both the pandemic, but also how you as MHA are thinking about reshaping what you're doing. And on a personal interest, I was interested in your digital chaplain. Perhaps that's another conversation, because I'd like to know how that. But I know from family and friends that actually maintaining faith through digital is another thing that's happened very successfully over the last year or so. So, but I think that's probably a whole different conversation, and perhaps follows on from the Church of England session we had a few weeks back. Thanks ever so, Dan, and actually all four of you, and those of you who are still with us may have noted that David's had to leave us, but we are joined now by Sarah Mitten and Eleanor Warwick from Clarion Group. A warm welcome. I know you've been listening behind the scenes as well, so we've got about 10 minutes or so to both sort of pick up on some of the questions that have been posted and one or two comments also in the chat box. So let's go first to the questions, and two interesting ones, one from Glyn and one from Sheila. I think we'll start with Sheila's if we may, and I know Eleanor you particularly wanted to address this as well, but we'll also, if you can kick off and then I'll open it out to the others. And Sheila, who some of you know, is a dear friend of the Housing Lynn at the Open University, and has written exclusively a lot. I remember her seminal report on inclusive housing. I wonder how the speakers are taking on board the housing needs of multi-generational families that include people 50 and a diversity of culture needs. So Ellen, do you want to kick off on that one?
Yes, I was going to, and I think it's great actually that Sheila's reminding us that actually multi-generational families, we need to have new ways of thinking about this. I mean, a lot of us who've been building houses, and I remember sort of like starting building large family homes across East London, sort of during the 90s and early 2000s for sort of like Peabody Housing Association, and we thought we had it right then. And I think the lesson from an awful lot that I've been hearing this afternoon is that we need to start to be sort of like rethinking things. We need to be sort of like a bit flexible, and I think multi-generational housing and housing which is actually going to be really sort of like sensitive to cultural needs to look beyond the typology. And we know that there's a huge sort of like number of really, really good examples. You know, we've all looked at sort of Cobham Manor. There's a lovely project that Matter Architects did, which was bringing together lots of international examples of sort of multi-generational, intergenerational housing. Clarion, like lots of other housing associations, we're building our own versions of this, particularly down in our regeneration schemes in sort of like Merton. The Housing Design Awards this year, there were 5 or 6 schemes which all sort of said we're doing intergenerational housing. Brilliant. Absolutely great. We need to be really aware of all those sort of like design sensitivities, the issues about sort of neighbourhoods. But the thing that I think that we need to be really flexible about is in the way that we actually sort of respond to what are those particular needs of families and households at a particular point in time. And that's what we're trying to do and underpin sort of like Clarion's age-friendly strategy, is actually reflecting, well, what do you need at this point in time? So for example, at our Merton regeneration sort of project. We have a couple of really interesting approaches we've got there. We have a block of a whole series of older people, sort of like over 55s, who'd lived together. Some were supported, some weren't. They all wanted to like move together into to live sort of like together. So that's something we've tried to sort of like accommodate and accommodating in the design. Similarly, we've been able to be really flexible within the rehousing approach that we've had with sort of like multi-generational families and say, well, what actually do you need? Do you need a large house, or what would be more useful is sort of like two bedroom flats within the same block, or something which is sort of like connected? And I think this is where we have to be sort of like really creative. We have to be creative about what is it about sort of like tenure, or allowing people to sort of like move, or to be able to sort of say this is going to be a part of a stepping stone if that's what's needed. And I think the challenge for housing associations is we're finding it's possible when we have large scale regeneration schemes and we can really get to know our residents and we can have that sort of like relationship. So I think, yeah, learn about the typology, learn about the things there, but at the heart is like learn to know who the people you're sort of like working with are.
Oh, that's great. And I think you've really sort of hit the nail on the head there. And you referred to people like Matter Architects, and we've got some great resources that they've published and others. We're part, and I think you've helped set up the intergenerational housing network as well. I know we meet you there. There's a supplementary bit that Sheila asked though, which is much more around looking at diversity. And I don't know whether you want to touch on that, or Vic, you talked about race into action and other matters. And Karen, and I'm sure Dan, you may have some examples as well. Do you have any views, any of you, on that diversity piece?
Only, I suppose, only that we're talking about it a lot at the moment and thinking about it a lot, but and looking at those really good examples externally, some of which Ellen has talked about. But I think where we've got to with this now, I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday about it, and she's been experiencing difficulties in terms of kind of what next for housing with her and family members. And I think where we've got to with it is that we really need to do that co-design piece, to have those conversations. But actually, if we just look internally within our customers at the moment, that won't give us everything that we need, and actually we need to go out much broader than that. So that's the piece of work that we're about to embark on, to do that co-design work with a whole range of different people in different communities to really understand what the needs are there.
Karen, Dan, anything that's coming through, particularly around some of your groups in South Manchester? Or, I mean, I remember Dan, some years ago, MHO doing a lot of work with the Afro-Caribbean communities and the like. So I don't know how that's percolated through more recently, but do either of you have any comments? Karen?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting questions, aren't they? I'm very interested in Eleanor's response about the intergenerational stuff. And if I'm honest, I don't think we've considered specific household sort of multi-generational requirements. So that's something I would probably want to take back and, you know, have more discussion in GM about, and just see if anyone is thinking about it. We are looking at intergenerational models, and particularly where it's a redevelopment opportunity. I think the thinking on that is progressing. Pottsoni Architects, who are sort of Manchester based, have come up with some really good models for that, for example. On diversity, you know, again, I think going back to our delivery plan, one of the things we recognise is that when you start to look, there is always good practice out there, and appreciate through the Housing Lin, we have opportunities to see some of that. But I suspect these questions are being dealt with in different places, even within Greater Manchester. And one of the things we want to do through the delivery plan is just start raising awareness, looking at what has worked, what does good look like. So I think, bit of a vague answer, but I think we would pick it up as part of that theme within our delivery plan.
That probably comes also back to that inclusivity that you set out as part of the overall improve or move approach. Dan, any other additions you'd like to draw attention to?
Yeah, I don't think I've got much that I can add, to be honest, Jeremy. And I think one of the challenges of being a national provider in the way that we are is that we don't have a kind of natural constituency in the way that some of the other speakers on the call do have in terms of being able to kind of tap into those local communities. I mean, I think you're right that we have had a couple of schemes across MHA where we have developed schemes, particularly in partnership with local communities. But I don't think there's anything specific in terms of that kind of EDI agenda that we're currently taking forwards around our scheme development.
Well, thanks. Sarah, I've ignored you. Have you got anything you would like to add on this, or?
I don't think so in terms of sort of a housing context. I guess from the community investment angle, we're doing lots of work. And I think just to reiterate what Eleanor said is that our age-friendly approach is about not defining people by age or by gender or by anything in particular, but it is about how we can enable people to thrive across those transition moments that they might have in their lives. So I probably would speak more from the community investment angle. So I don't think I've got anything particularly to add on top of what Eleanor said.
Well, thanks very much for your contributions, all of you, on that question. We have one other question, which I will come to, and this is from Glyn. And Glyn raises a really interesting point, which is not necessarily around specialist housing. And I think Sian, in her comments in the chat box, also drew attention to different sort of mutual or co-housing cooperative models. And I'm just saying, as far as conventional housing associations are concerned, what provisions should be made for residents to have a meaningful say in the management of the association? So one or two of you talked about co-production. Can you see two aspects? One is about, is there a need to think more about co-production in the way we manage existing governance arrangements? And the second is more about what growth opportunities are there for cooperative and co-housing models. So Karen, can I kick off with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the co-housing in particular, we believe there is really a place for that within our neighbourhoods where we work, and that there are quite a few sort of owner-occupied led sort of co-housing models, even in Manchester, but in other parts of the country. But social housing, really there isn't. So we have done some work with support from the Manchester School of Architecture, looking at international best practice around that, and we are currently looking at doing a sort of small neighbourhood based co-housing scheme. Now it's a little bit upside down because the initiative is going to come from us, and we're going to try and find a group of people who are interested in working with us on it, rather than it coming from the group of people in the first place. But we see it as a prototype that could really have a place within the way our communities operate, the way our neighbourhoods operate. So yeah, we're very excited about that, and just in those sort of early stages of coming up with a design, thinking through all the management issues, because obviously if it's social housing, you've got allocation policies and stuff like this. So yeah, we've got a few things to work through, but I think it has got a real place for some people who want that type of option.
Thank you. And Sarah, Eleanor?
I was just going to mention, Eleanor, about some work that we've been doing for quite a while around how we ensure that residents have a voice. And one of the kind of things that I'm quite proud of over the last few months is that we have a Clarion 55 group, who are a group of residents that come from across our communities. And one of the things that they wanted to tackle throughout their tenure was socialisation and loneliness, and have actually pushed and pitched to our directors to look at home share models. So in September, we're looking to pilot a home share model. We're looking at sort of 8 relationships over a year period to see whether it can work in a social housing context. And that really has come from our residents that felt that it would be an answer to looking at socialisation and loneliness and bringing generations together in a sort of mutually beneficial housing model. So I think that's been something that I've definitely been proud of over the last few months. And similarly, I know to Vic and South Yorkshire Housing, we have been looking more and more at how co-production can be a way of bringing together staff, residents and local organisations that understand our communities to do better, and to look at new services and projects that can have a positive impact in our communities. So we're certainly looking at how that model can be further embedded across our work.
Really, do you have any examples like that, or Dan, around that sort of approach?
I don't have any examples around the co-housing, but definitely from a co-production point of view, it's for us just something that we're always working on and developing. And as part of the Aging Better work that we've done with the lottery, we've developed a national toolkit, which I wanted to share today, but it's not quite ready. It's ready in a couple of weeks, but it's something I'll definitely share with you, Jeremy, when it's done to share out. But just this idea of working with people in the design and delivery of services is something that it focuses on, and it's across the 14 areas in England. So it's really rich in good tools and approaches.
Oh, we look forward to receiving that. Eleanor, Dan, any final comments from you on this question?
Yeah, I'm happily chip in, but I mean, it's probably less about the kind of meaningful say in the management of the organisation, and more about a meaningful say in the management of the scheme. Obviously, all of our retirement living schemes have kind of resident associations, resident committees, and we work quite closely with those in terms of developing the kind of local scheme and the services associated with those. But probably more importantly for MHA is our MHA community schemes, where kind of co-production is probably the kind of lifeblood of those schemes, and without co-production they really don't exist, because they only exist to serve the communities in which they're sited. And certainly we're working really hard, as I said earlier on, to try and make much stronger connections between our community schemes and our kind of bricks and mortar schemes and care homes, and really build those bridges between the co-production that's going on in those local communities, and then widening that out and bringing the community into our retirement living schemes and care homes, and making our care homes and retirement living schemes much more kind of part of the community, and having that kind of two-way integration.
Well, thanks for that. Ellen, I think that's final word then from you, if I may, before I do my summing up. We're running slightly over, but I think people are really enjoying this.
Well, then I'm going to add something which possibly doesn't add more on this issue of sort of like co-housing and cooperative housing, because otherwise I will talk for ages on it, but more sort of like pick up a reflection from what we've heard from everybody today about this idea about the route maps and the different journeys that everybody's being on, and how, you know, Vic, you know, the amazing stuff you've been doing over the last sort of like 7 years, and the fact that it all sort of like takes time, and it all takes time for these things to evolve. And Dan, the fact that you were sort of saying to embed the work that you're doing sort of like with communities is really, really sort of like critical. And you know, Karen, Greater Manchester have always been out there. You know, you've been motoring along on the motorway, and some of us are sort of like catching up in sort of like different ways. And I was just thinking, the thing that we've found most useful in Clarion with the work that we've been doing, and it's taken sort of like some time to get there, is actually recognizing all these very different journeys and different routes that people are coming through, and how much a lot of these different strands and work streams sort of like can actually really reinforce some of the things that you're doing. And what I've been really most excited about, the things that I've been hearing, is the way that everybody, like sort of Vic and Karen, you know, you've been beginning to say, well, actually we're starting to increase this to offer our service to everybody. We're offering it to sort of like everybody in a region, everybody in the neighborhood. And I think that's the thing that I think we need to be sort of like encouraged, that we're on this sort of like journey, that it's no longer just a few exemplar, sort of like a few sort of small projects, but it's actually something which is beginning to really change a lot of the activities that we'd be doing across sort of like the sector. So apologies, I've not answered the question.
No, but I think it's a really point really well made. So thanks for that. Well, on that, I need to bring this to a close, because as chair, I've done this terribly. We're 5 minutes over. But on behalf of the Housing Inn, a real thanks for all our speakers. I know David had to leave early. Could I also thank Jerome and Sally for managing the systems behind, so they've all run smoothly in terms of PowerPoints, but also for uploading various resources and pointing out good practice guides and the like. The last question question we asked around governance, if you're not familiar with it, the Housing Then is a real champion of something we've coined Collaborage, and we have a directory of practice that looks at different approaches, both at governance level, but also asset-based community development. So as Eleanor says, there are so many route maps out there. If there are ones that you would like to share with us that we can include in that Collaborage directory, please do let us know. We look forward to engaging with you to include those in the future. And somebody's actually just reminded me by posting in the chat box of our future happy hours. We're actually looking at one of those schemes that have been shortlisted for the Housing Design Awards on intergenerational housing, a scheme in Lewisham. So we're looking forward to putting the spotlight on that towards the end of July. But if you're also interested in other happy hours that we're running, do have a look on our website. Next week's Collaborage is specifically looking at some of the developments in London and Manchester again, with the LGBT Foundation and other operators and the University of Surrey to think as part of, as Pride Month, issues around housing for people from the LGBTQI community. So please do join us again. But it only leaves me to say thank you ever so much, all of you, for your excellent contributions today. Thanks for Sarah and Ella for joining in when David had to drop out. That was really useful. And I really look forward to working with you all, both through our happy hours, but more broadly as we go forward. So all the best, everybody.